If you grew up near the Appalachian Mountains, you already know. Folks don't just make up stories out here, they remember them. I'd love to know, where are you tuning in from, and what time is it right now? Drop it in the comments. It's wild how many of us are sitting in the dark, listening to the same story, scattered across different corners of the country. Hit the like button and subscribe. It helps more people find their way into these woods, whether they should or not. Let's start. I'm Daniel, 34 years old, and I've spent most of my life bouncing between odd jobs, bartender, warehouse loader, handyman, never really sticking with one long enough to make a career of it. This past year, I've been working as a groundskeeper for a private high school outside Asheville, North Carolina. The pay isn't great, but the job comes with a small rental house the school owns, perched on the edge of Pisgah National Forest. It's an old two-story place with weathered siding and sagging gutters, but it beats paying city rent. My girlfriend, Marissa, works double shifts as a nurse, which means I usually spend long nights there alone. I've never minded solitude. In fact, after years of noisy barrooms and cluttered apartments, the silence felt like a luxury. One Friday night in early spring, the school was shut down for Easter break, and I had the rare gift of an empty weekend to myself. Marissa had picked up another overnight at the hospital. My plan was simple: raid the fridge, drink a couple beers, and burn through a backlog of mindless action movies. It was around 10:30, and I had just settled into the couch with an open bag of chips when the first strange thing happened. The lamp beside me gave a faint buzzing sound and dimmed, not like a quick flicker, but more like someone turned the knob halfway down. The TV paused for half a heartbeat and then resumed. At first, I chalked it up to bad wiring. The school's maintenance guy had warned me that the circuits were outdated. I leaned back, shrugged it off, and kept watching. But a few minutes later, it happened again, this time stronger. The ceiling light overhead faded to a weak orange glow. The air conditioner cut out. The whole house felt suddenly hushed, as if the walls were swallowing sound. That's when I heard the curtain behind me shift. Just a twitch, quick and sharp, like something had brushed it from the other side of the glass door. The back door doesn't get drafts, no vent, no open window nearby. Still, I told myself it was nothing. Curiosity won, though, so I stood and pulled the curtain back. The yard was empty. The porch was slick from a drizzle earlier, but there was no one outside. When I turned back toward the couch, I froze. On the floor by the door were footprints, bare feet, damp and clear, leading away from the threshold. The prints trailed across the living room, curving toward the kitchen. They were heavy enough to smear, as though whoever left them had stepped through puddles. My first thought was that maybe Marissa had come home early. But the prints were larger, wider than her feet, and besides, I never heard the door open. I followed them carefully. Each step I took felt heavier, like I was walking into a dream I didn't want to finish. The trail curved into the kitchen, then toward the narrow stairwell at the back of the house. That was where they stopped, right at the base of the stairs, toes pointed upward. My gut clenched. Every instinct screamed at me to get out, but I couldn't stop staring. Whoever it was hadn't left. They'd gone upstairs. It took me almost a full minute to move. Finally, I pulled out my phone and tapped the flashlight on. The stairwell stretched up in front of me, shadows thick and heavy against the old wallpaper. Step by step, I climbed. My breath sounded too loud in the silence. The prints led me down the hallway toward the guest room, the one we barely used, just a junk room with old furniture. The door stood ajar. My hand shook as I nudged it open. Inside, the room looked ordinary. The bed frame, the shelves stacked with dusty boxes, a dresser we never got around to selling. Nothing out of place. I exhaled a shaky laugh. Maybe I was seeing things. Maybe the prints were old, and I hadn't noticed before. Then the door slammed shut behind me. Hard. The sound shook the glass in the window. I lunged back and twisted the knob, but it wouldn't budge. It was locked from the outside. My pulse hammered in my ears as I pressed against the door. I could almost feel something standing just beyond it, listening. The air in the room seemed to thicken, pressing against my lungs. And then, with deliberate slowness, the knob turned on its own. The door creaked open just enough to reveal the dark hall. No one was there. I didn't wait. I bolted, down the stairs, through the living room, out the front door barefoot into the damp gravel. My car was parked a few yards away. I jumped in, locked the doors, started the engine, and sat there shaking. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. I called Marissa and begged her to come home. I didn't bother with details, just told her something was wrong. She believed me, I think, because she left work early. I wouldn't step foot back inside until she pulled up and we walked in together. For weeks afterward, the house didn't feel the same. The lights flickered at odd times, even on clear nights. Marissa swore she heard footsteps upstairs when I was at work. Drawers would be left open, cabinets wide when we hadn't touched them. Once, I found the kitchen faucet running full blast. I blamed stress, maybe her long shifts or my paranoia, but deep down I knew it was more than that. The worst was the closet under the stairs. One evening I was hunting for a toolbox and noticed strange marks carved into the wall inside. At first, I thought they were just gouges from old furniture, but when I leaned closer with a flashlight, I saw they were letters. Dozens of them, carved over and over, sloppy and uneven. They spelled my name, Daniel, scratched into the wood again and again. Some were jagged, like whoever did it kept forgetting how to write and tried again. Underneath, cut deeper than the rest, were 3 words. I remember you. I didn't sleep that night. Neither did Marissa when I showed her. She wanted to call the police, but what would we say? That the house was haunted? That some phantom squatter knew my name? In the end, we didn't argue. We broke the lease, paid the penalty, and moved into a cramped apartment on the other side of town. 3rd floor, brick walls, nothing fancy but quiet. Safe. At least that's what we told ourselves. It's been months since then. We don't talk about the house. But last week, when I came home late from work, there was something waiting in the hallway. Water stains, smeared across the hardwood. The faint shape of bare footprints, leading from the door straight toward our bedroom. I'm Aaron, 38, and I spend most of my nights driving. I work deliveries for a medical courier service, hauling everything from lab samples to refrigerated shipments between clinics across western North Carolina. The job pays just enough to keep the lights on, and the late hours suit me. I've always been more comfortable on the road at night than sitting in an office. You start to develop a strange intimacy with the backroads out here, the way they twist through the mountains, the sudden dips where fog rolls in thick as soup, the way old barns and derelict farmhouses seem to lean closer to the shoulder when your headlights sweep across them. I don't scare easy, not from being alone out there. At least I didn't. Not until last November. That night, I was finishing a run out of Brevard. The weather had turned sour quick, a cold, relentless rain hammering the windshield in waves. My shift had already stretched late, 2 drop-offs delayed me, and I was tempted to find a cheap motel and call it. But home wasn't far. 30 miles, give or take. Less if I cut through the mountain pass that wound around Laurel Fork, a route I'd taken a dozen times. It wasn't a road I liked, not really, narrow, unlit, and lined with pines that seemed to huddle together like they were conspiring. But it shaved nearly 20 minutes off the trip. By the time I hit the pass, the rain was coming down so hard the wipers could barely keep up. The yellow center line had dissolved into water, and the shoulders melted into darkness. I slowed to a crawl, knuckles white on the wheel, trying to ignore how the branches scraped against the van's roof like fingernails. That's when I saw her. She was standing just past the bend, on the right-hand shoulder. I only caught her for an instant as the headlights washed over her. Bare feet, a pale dress clinging to her body, hair plastered flat against her face. She wasn't moving, wasn't waving for help, just standing. Arms slack, head slightly bowed like she was waiting. My first reaction was automatic. I hit the brakes hard, the van shuddering as it slowed. In the mirror, the rain blurred everything into streaks, but I thought I saw her silhouette vanish into the sheets of water. My pulse spiked. No one should have been out there. Not in that storm. Not in that stretch of nowhere. I rolled the window down a crack, rain slapping my face. "Hey, you okay?" I shouted into the dark. My words vanished in the downpour. No answer. No movement. Nothing but rain hammering the asphalt. Logic told me to keep going, but I've transported enough emergency blood packs and chemo samples to know that hesitation can cost lives. What if she was in trouble? What if she'd been in an accident nearby? I put the van in park and stepped out. The storm swallowed me whole. Rain pelted my jacket and stung my skin, seeping into my boots in seconds. I kept one hand on the van's side as I circled it, scanning the road. No sign of her. No footprints in the muck by the shoulder, no figure moving in the trees. Just endless rain. I cursed under my breath, half angry at myself for even stopping, half relieved I didn't see her again. When I climbed back into the van, though I froze, the driver's seat was drenched. Not damp, soaked, like someone had sat there dripping wet for hours. But I knew I hadn't left the door open, and the rest of the cab was bone dry. My clothes, too. I should have been soaked from head to toe, but my shirt clung dry against me, my hair only lightly misted. I ran a hand through it in disbelief. That was when I caught it in the corner of my eye, the rearview mirror. For a split second, I thought I saw movement in the back seat. A pale blur, the faint suggestion of a face, eyes too wide. I whipped around. The seat was empty. Nothing there. I slammed the van in drive and kept going, faster this time, ignoring the way my tires hissed on the wet asphalt. I told myself to focus. Get home. Don't stop. Don't look again. But 5 minutes later, she was back. This time she wasn't by the road. She was in it, dead center, standing with her back to me, hair hanging limp, head tilted slightly to one side as though listening to something in the trees. My heart lurched. I slammed the horn, swerved, but when I blinked, she wasn't there. The road was empty. I was shaking now, adrenaline buzzing in my veins. I wanted to floor it, but the rain kept me crawling forward. Every shadow between the trees looked like it might step into the headlights. Then came the sound, a heavy thud on the roof, sharp enough to rattle my teeth. Not a branch, not debris, deliberate, like something had landed right above me. I jerked the wheel, swore out loud, and pulled over. For reasons I still can't explain, I climbed out again. The rain was merciless, but I swept my flashlight across the van's roof. Nothing. No dents, no branches, no sign anything had been there. That was when I heard it, low, muffled, but unmistakable. A woman's voice, coming from inside the van. I turned. The cab was dark through the rain-smeared windows. Empty. But the voice came again, faint and warped, like words spoken underwater. I yanked the driver's door open. Silence. No one there. But the seat, it was soaked again. Water pooled in the creases, dripping slowly onto the floor mat. I drove like hell after that. My hands hurt from gripping the wheel so tight. I didn't dare look in the mirror again, not even when instinct told me something was behind me. The road felt endless, stretching longer than it ever had. When I finally reached the highway junction, I thought I'd made it. Civilization at last. Streetlights, faint traffic, safety. But as I slowed at the stop sign, my phone buzzed in the cup holder. A new notification. I glanced at it and nearly swerved off the road. It was a photo, taken just minutes earlier. The angle was from the back seat, camera pointed forward. My hands white-knuckled on the wheel, my head tilted in fear. And just behind me, reflected in the rearview mirror, was her face. Eyes wide, mouth stretched into something that looked like a smile, but wasn't. I almost threw the phone out the window. Instead, I shoved it under the seat, refusing to look again until I made it home. When I got inside, I locked every door and window. The clock read 3:12 a.m. My jacket was bone dry. My boots left no puddle on the floor. And my phone, the notification was gone. No photo in the gallery. Nothing in the trash. I stayed up until sunrise, lights blazing in every room, listening for thuds on the roof. I haven't touched that shortcut since. People can call me paranoid if they want. I've heard enough locals whisper about Laurel Fork Woman to know I'm not the first to see her. They say she drowned in the flood of '73 when the river burst its banks, and she's been waiting ever since, searching the roads for drivers too stubborn to turn back. I just know one thing: when the rain comes hard and the road disappears, I take the long way. Always. My name's Jonah, I'm 31, and at the time this happened, I was working as a line cook in a tavern just outside Saltville, Virginia. Nights were my bread and butter, long hours, hot kitchens, and the kind of exhaustion that makes you grateful for the silence when you finally walk home. The tavern shut down at 1 most nights, but I rarely got out before 2, and back then I didn't have a car. Couldn't afford one. My apartment was only a couple miles away, and walking through the quiet streets had always been my way to unwind, even when it rained. Especially when it rained. The drizzle softened everything: the neon beer signs, the cracked sidewalks, even the rusting mill skeletons at the edge of town. That night in late October, it was pouring. Not a gentle shower, but a cold, hammering storm that seemed determined to wash Saltville clean off the map. I pulled my jacket tight, shoved my hands into my pockets, and took the long way home through the hollow. It wasn't shorter, but the streets there were usually empty, and after hours of shouting in a hot kitchen, emptiness was exactly what I wanted. 10 minutes into the walk, the quiet shifted. My earbuds fizzled in one ear, static, then silence, and I tugged it out with an annoyed grunt. That was when I noticed the figure. He was standing at the far end of the street beneath a broken lamp, the storm pouring over him like he wasn't even there. He didn't hunch against the rain or shift his weight. Just stood, arms slack, head tilted slightly upward, as if he were waiting for something to pass overhead. I slowed down without meaning to. There are drunks, there are addicts, there are people who linger in doorways at night. I'd seen it all before, but there was something about the stillness that hooked into me. He wasn't moving the way a person should, not even a twitch. The moment I turned down a side street, I felt better. Gave him space. I told myself it was nothing, that I was just tired and paranoid, but my pace quickened all the same. Rain blurred my vision, pooled around my boots, hissed against the pavement. That was when I heard it. Tap. Not the rain. Distinct. Slow. Deliberate. Tap. I stopped. The sound stopped too. I turned around. The sidewalk was empty, water sluicing toward the gutters, neon signs flickering behind fogged glass storefronts. Nobody there. I pushed forward harder, cutting down a lane I knew well, a shortcut between two old brick warehouses that spat me out closer to my building. I'd walked that cut 100 times. I should have felt safe there, but halfway through, I caught movement in my periphery. I snapped my head around and my stomach dropped. He was there, not 20 feet behind me. Same figure, same posture. His hair clung to his face, dripping, though the puddle at his feet was perfectly still. The water didn't ripple. The reflection didn't form. Worse, he wasn't standing on the ground. He hovered just above it, like the rain had erased the rules for him and him alone. I bolted. I don't remember much of the sprint, just the sting of rain in my eyes, the slap of my boots on wet pavement, the hollow echo of my own gasps in my ears. When I rounded the corner to my building, I fumbled my keys so badly I nearly dropped them in the gutter. I slammed the door behind me, bolted it, and leaned there gasping, trying to convince myself it had been a trick of the storm. Then the power died. Not a flicker, not a surge, just gone. The hallway was swallowed in black, the kind of black you can't convince your eyes to adjust to. My breath hitched, and then I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. Above me, I lived on the top floor. The sound crept across the ceiling, slow and measured, like bare feet padding on the boards. I backed away from the door, step by step, staring upward. The sound stopped directly over my bedroom. Then 3 sharp raps came, deliberate as a knuckle on wood. Tap, tap, tap. I fled into my room, locked the door, and pressed my back against the wall, my phone clutched in my hand. My first instinct was to call the police, but what would I say? That some floating man had followed me home in the storm? I sat in silence, every nerve on fire, waiting for the tapping to start again. Instead, it came from the window. 3 soft knocks against the glass. My blinds were down, but the storm outside backlit them faintly, and through that gray blur, I could see the outline. The silhouette was inches from the pane. His arms hung straight down. His head was cocked unnaturally to the side, like an insect studying prey. But there was no ledge outside my 3rd-story window. No fire escape. Just 30 feet of empty air. I stayed frozen until dawn. At some point the power came back, and when I finally worked up the nerve to peek, the window was empty. No footprints. No handprints. No water streaks. Just glass. I told myself it was exhaustion. Stress. A hallucination born from too many late nights. But a week later, I heard locals talking in the diner about the Watcher of Salt Hollow. They said he was an old soul left behind when the mines collapsed in the early 1900s, taking nearly 100 men with them. Folks swore the Watcher still lingered on storm nights, drifting through the hollow, waiting outside windows for someone foolish enough to meet his gaze. Once you'd seen him, they said, you never stopped hearing him. He'd follow you home, wait at your walls, tap until you gave in and opened something, door, window, mine, didn't matter. I laughed it off at the counter that morning, but the laugh rang hollow in my chest. Because every time it rains now, even a drizzle, I hear it. Tap. From the ceiling. Tap. Against the window. I don't look anymore. Not ever. But sometimes, when I lie awake, I swear I feel the mattress shift, as though someone heavier than me has finally sat down. My name's Mason, I'm 34, and back when this happened I was working graveyard shifts at a regional logistics hub in Wise County, Virginia. It wasn't glamorous work, mostly routing shipments and taking calls from truckers stuck in the mountains at odd hours. But the pay kept my rent covered, and the nights suited me. When I clocked out, usually after 2 in the morning, I just wanted quiet. That October night had been brutal. Half the staff called in, a diesel spill shut down part of the yard, and I spent the last 2 hours listening to a driver curse at me over missed schedules. By the time I left, I was fried, eyes dry, back stiff, nerves strung too tight. I just wanted my couch and a few hours of sleep before the next shift. It had been pouring since before midnight. Not the light mist we get sometimes in the hollers, but a hammering storm that blurred the road into smeared reflections. My usual drive home wound across Black Hollow Bridge, and then up through Lawson Gap, a twisting climb lined with sagging houses and trees that clawed into the roadway. The gap was always eerie at night, but it shaved 15 minutes off the highway route, and exhaustion had me choosing speed over comfort. The rain battered the windshield, my wipers squealing against the glass. Every headlight reflection shimmered across the flooded asphalt. I slowed to 20, hugging the middle of the road to keep from hydroplaning. That was when I saw her. She stood dead center in the lane. For a split second I thought it was a teenager caught in the storm, maybe trying to wave me down for help. She was barefoot, skin pale against the black road, a long gown clinging wet to her body. But she wasn't waving. She wasn't moving at all. Her arms hung stiff at her sides, her head angled strangely, like her neck was too weak to hold it straight. I slammed the brakes. The van fishtailed before stopping barely 10 feet from her. My heart punched at my ribs. She didn't flinch. The storm plastered her hair across her face, but what little I could see of her skin was too pale, almost bluish, like she'd been carved from wax. I cracked the window. "Hey, you need help." Nothing. The silence around her was wrong. Even with the rain hammering the van roof, the air between us felt muted. I reached for my phone, ready to call dispatch or 911, and that's when she moved. She didn't step forward. She pivoted. Her whole body turned as one, shoulders, hips, feet swiveling together, like a marionette twisted on a string. When her face turned toward me, my chest seized. She didn't have eyes. Not gouged out. Not covered. Just hollow darkness where eyes should have been. Yet I felt her looking at me. Felt it like 2 ice picks driving into the back of my skull. My mouth went dry. Her jaw began to slacken, unhinging wider and wider. Not in a scream, but in something mechanical, wrong, the pitch black of her mouth yawning deeper than it should. I panicked, slammed the shifter into reverse, tires screaming against waterlogged pavement. The van lurched backwards, clipped a roadside post, and I barely wrestled it under control. When I looked forward again, she was gone. Or not gone. She was closer, pressed against the hood, her head twitching as her mouth sagged wider, a cavern swallowing all light. I screamed, floored the accelerator, and shot forward. I didn't care if I hit her. But the instant the bumper should have struck, there was nothing, just empty road and rain. My chest was heaving, sweat pouring down my face, my hands locked white on the wheel. I didn't drive home. I circled town for nearly an hour, checking the mirrors again and again, half expecting to see her face plastered to the rear glass. Eventually, I parked outside a 24-hour gas station and sat with the engine running until dawn. The next night at work, I tried to shake it off. Told myself it was stress, exhaustion, shadows in the storm. But a week later, it came back around in a way that snapped my stomach into knots. One of the drivers, an older guy named Boone, was swapping stories in the break room. He mentioned Lawson Gap. Said his wife begged him never to take that road when it rained. Kids around there had a name for it, he said. The widow of Black Hollow Bridge. I froze mid-sip of my coffee. Boone said she was supposed to be the spirit of a woman from the coal camp days, left stranded in a flood when the river swelled and carried off half her family. Different people gave different versions. Some swore she was hit by a wagon on the bridge. Others said she drowned searching for her child. But all the stories agreed on a few things. She appeared in storms. She wore white. And if you saw her eyes, if she turned to face you, she'd follow you. I didn't tell Boone what I saw. I just nodded along, pretending to laugh at the old story, but inside I felt hollow, because he described her exactly. Since then, I've avoided that road. I take the long way through the highway, even if it costs more in gas and time. Doesn't matter. But sometimes when it rains, I swear I still hear it, the faint squeak of wipers, the hollow hush inside the storm. And when I glance at the rear view, just for a split second, I think I see her. Not standing in the road this time. Closer, like she's already inside, sitting in the back seat, waiting for me to notice. I'm 32. I was working as a night driver for a small pharmacy distribution company in eastern Kentucky. Most people don't think of medicine deliveries at 3 in the morning, but hospitals never sleep, and clinics scattered along the mountain backroads depend on couriers to bring what they need. The pay was steady enough, better than most jobs around here, and the solitude of the night runs suited me fine. That October evening had been brutal weather-wise. It wasn't a storm in the cinematic sense. No lightning, no thunder shaking the hills, just a relentless, bone-deep drizzle that had been falling since mid-afternoon and hadn't let up. That kind of rain doesn't pour, it seeps. It sinks into your clothes, slicks your hair flat, fills the air with a kind of cold heaviness that makes you feel like you're breathing through a sponge. I hated it, but work was work. By 10:30, I was heading out on my last run of the night, a small delivery to a rural clinic tucked near the edge of Ironwood Valley. I'd been out that way before, though not often. Ironwood isn't really a town, just a scatter of farms, trailers, and one gas station that looks like it hasn't been updated since the 70s. The road that leads there, Cutter's Trace, is older than the county itself. Folks say it followed an old game trail used by settlers before there were real roads through the valley. I never paid much attention to that sort of lore before. I should have. The first stretch wasn't bad. Wet, sure, but manageable. Deer flashed their eyes at me from the tree line, but that was expected. I had a podcast droning softly, the heater on low, and the thought of a warm bed waiting for me when I got home. But the further I went, the less I recognized. The GPS on my dashboard blinked once, then froze. I tapped the screen, muttered a curse, and kept going. Cutter's Trace narrowed quick. The asphalt bled into gravel, then into broken patches of pavement cracked like old bone. The forest pressed closer on both sides, branches interlacing overhead, so thick the rain barely reached the ground in some stretches. The headlights pushed into the dark, but it felt like shining a flashlight into an endless cave. No matter how far the beams went, they never revealed enough. And then I saw her. At first I thought it was a trick of the eyes, maybe a scarecrow propped too close to the road. But no, she was standing on the shoulder, half turned toward me. A woman, though something about her posture made that word feel wrong. She was soaked through, wearing a long dress or shift that clung to her in the rain. Her hair, dark and stringy, plastered across her cheeks. She didn't wave, didn't flinch. She just stared, or seemed to. My gut clenched, but I kept driving. I didn't stop, didn't slow, just pressed harder on the gas. 100 explanations rushed through my head. Some lost hiker, some drunk from a nearby farm. But none of those fit the stillness in her frame. A minute later, my phone buzzed on the seat beside me. I grabbed it, hoping maybe it had regained a signal. The screen lit up, then blinked black. When it rebooted, the GPS map was gone. No address, no routes. Just a gray void where the map should be, pulsing faintly, like it was breathing. I told myself not to panic. Find a turnout. Backtrack. I slowed, eyes scanning for a patch wide enough to turn around. The road twisted tight between steep embankments, trees gnashing at the mirrors. Finally, I spotted a muddy shoulder where the gravel widened out. I shifted to reverse and checked the mirror. My stomach lurched. She was standing directly behind the van, closer than before. The tilt of her head was wrong, too sharp, as if her neck had been broken and set badly. The wet dress clung to her shape, but her arms hung too low, the fingers grazing her knees. Even through the rain-smeared glass I could see her face. Too pale, too smooth, the kind of color you only see in something that hasn't drawn breath in decades. I didn't think. I threw the gear into drive and hit the gas, tires spitting mud as the van lurched forward. I didn't care about the shoulder or the ruts, I just needed to move. My chest hammered, hands slick with sweat. The road didn't make sense after that. I passed the same twisted mile marker twice, then again a third time. My headlights swept over the same fallen birch tree leaning across the ditch. The turns felt shuffled, repeating like pieces of a bad dream. That was when the radio cut out. Not just silence, the speaker popped, hissed, and then the entire dashboard dimmed. Not all at once. It faded slowly, like someone was sliding a dimmer switch down. Headlights, gauges, interior lights, one by one until the cabin was swallowed in shadow. Only the engine hummed, steady as if mocking the rest of it. Then came the sound. Tap. Soft. Too soft to be rain. Tap. Measured, deliberate, coming from behind me. I turned slowly. The rear window was fogged from the inside, a faint glow from the dying dashboard painting the glass in gray. And there, pressed against the condensation, was a face. Pale. Hollow-eyed. Smiling with lips that didn't part. I screamed and bolted out of the van. My boots slid in the mud, my hand slammed against the wet gravel, and pain shot up my wrist. I staggered back, staring at the van with my chest heaving. The rear door was shut. No one had gotten out. No one could have. I yanked the handle anyway. The back seats were empty, but damp. The fabric clung wet against my fingers, though the windows had been sealed the whole drive. And in the center of the rear glass, where the fog had been disturbed, was a perfect handprint. Small, sharp, no smudge, no drag. Just pressed there, as if to remind me I wasn't alone. I didn't get back inside. I grabbed my useless phone and walked. My shoes slapped the wet pavement, my breath ragged in the night. No sounds of frogs or owls, no wind in the trees, only rain and the echo of my own footsteps. Time stretched. Every bend looked the same as the last. After what felt like forever, headlights cut through the curtain of rain behind me. Relief surged hot in my chest. I stumbled into the road, waving both arms. A red pickup slowed, wipers squeaking. The driver rolled his window down, just enough for his voice to carry over the rain. Middle-aged. Tired eyes. "You okay, son?" I nodded, then shook my head, words stumbling out about my van, about it dying on the road. I didn't mention her. I couldn't. He looked me up and down, frowned like he was deciding whether I was drunk, then jerked his head toward the passenger side. "Hop in. I'll get you back to town." I did. He dropped me at the gas station on Route 7, didn't say much the whole way, and I didn't press it. Just sat there, muscles taut, waiting for her to appear in the side mirror. She didn't. The mechanic looked at the van the next day. Found nothing wrong. Battery solid. Alternator fine. Electrical system clean. The GPS worked perfectly, no glitches. He laughed when I pressed him about the dashboard failure. "These old models hiccup sometimes," he said. "But I know better, because I remember the way the road bent on itself, folding like a snake eating its tail. I remember the silence in the woods, not even the scrape of a single branch. I remember the face in the glass and that cold, perfect handprint. A few weeks later, I made the mistake of telling an older coworker about it. He didn't laugh. He didn't even look surprised. He just asked one question. Was it Cutter's trace? When I nodded, he leaned closer, his voice dropping low. "They say the road was built wrong, laid over an old burial stretch. Folks called it the Widow's Mile. Anybody who drove it alone in the rain saw her. Some got turned around until sunrise. Others," he trailed off, eyes flicking to the floor. I didn't ask what he meant by others. I don't deliver to Ironwood anymore. I don't drive nights if I can help it. And when it rains, I don't sit in my car with the windows fogged, not ever again. Because sometimes when the drizzle goes on long enough, I swear I see it, just faintly, in the corner of the rearview mirror. A pale face leaning close, breath misting the glass, waiting for me to notice. At the time this happened, I was working as an X-ray technician at a small medical center in the foothills outside Norton, Virginia. The hours were long, the pay was just enough to scrape by, and the graveyard shifts had drained me into a permanent state of half-exhaustion. But I lived alone, and the quiet of an empty house was a relief after 12 hours of fluorescent lights, crying children, and patients arguing over co-pays. Silence felt like medicine. That particular Friday had been brutal. We had 3 traumas back to back: a head-on collision on 23, a miner who crushed his foot under equipment, and an elderly woman pulled from a house fire who needed scans before they could airlift her. By the time I finally clocked out, I'd been on my feet for nearly 15 hours. My body was aching, my eyes dry, and my scrubs smelled faintly of smoke and antiseptic. All I wanted was to collapse into bed, maybe leave the TV on low, and disappear until morning. It was nearly midnight when I pulled onto the narrow road that led to my rental. The rain had picked up during my drive, steady and unrelenting, blurring the windshield into rivers of glass. The house itself wasn't much, an old one-story sitting at the edge of a wooded lot in a forgotten neighborhood called Pine Hollow. Half the homes there were abandoned, roofs caving in, porches sagging. But the rent was cheap, and the landlord didn't ask many questions. When I turned into the gravel drive, the first thing I noticed was the porch light. It was off. That may not sound like much, but I am the kind of person who checks locks twice, who makes sure the coffee maker is unplugged before leaving, who always leaves the light on by the door. It was habit, ritual. That bulb was my reassurance when I came home alone at night. Seeing it dark, with rain pouring down in sheets, made my chest tighten. I told myself it had to be the bulb. They burn out. It happens. I grabbed my bag, yanked my hood up, and ran for the door. In the seconds it took, the rain had soaked me through, plastering my hair to my scalp. My keys slipped once in my trembling hand before I managed to get the lock to click. Inside, the hall light came on just fine. Relief washed over me for a heartbeat. I kicked off my shoes, set my bag down, and listened to the house. Nothing out of place. Blanket tossed on the couch, cup from the morning still on the counter. The faint trace of lavender from the cheap candle I'd left burning earlier clung to the air. Then came the first sound. Not the usual creak of settling beams, but a heavy thump from the back of the house. I froze mid-step, hand gripping the counter. It hadn't come from outside. Not the roof, not the porch. Inside. Deliberate. Weighty. The first excuse that popped into my head was the broom in the laundry room. Maybe it slipped. Maybe I'd left it against the wall, and it toppled. I wanted to believe that. I made myself believe it. Then it happened again. Thump. Deeper. Louder. Every hair on my arms prickled. I couldn't think of a single object in the house that could have made that kind of sound. It wasn't a clatter. It wasn't wood shifting. It was impact. And then, soft as a whisper, I heard footsteps. Wet footsteps. Slow, deliberate, padding across the linoleum kitchen floor. My throat closed. I didn't move. Not at first. Whoever was in my house wasn't trying to hide. They weren't rushing. They were taking their time. I fumbled for my phone on the counter, thumb shaking as I clicked the flashlight on. I didn't dare turn on more lights. I felt like if I drew too much attention, whoever it was would know exactly where I stood. My pulse was deafening as I crept toward the hallway, careful to place each step silently. There's a corner before you can see the kitchen. I pressed myself flat against the wall, eased my head forward just enough to peek. And that's when I saw him. A man, standing barefoot in front of the sink. Water pooled around his feet, dark spots spreading across the tile. His clothes were plastered to him, dripping as though he'd waded through the creek behind the neighborhood. His head was tilted slightly downward, his hair hanging in strings over his face. He didn't move, didn't shift, just stood, staring out the window above the sink as if he belonged there. The stillness was worse than if he'd lunged at me. It was the stillness of something that didn't need to care. I backed away, phone trembling in my hand. I walked backward one step at a time, not daring to make noise. When I reached the door, I grabbed my keys and slipped outside into the storm. Rain swallowed me instantly, but I didn't care. I sprinted barefoot down the drive to my car, flung myself inside, and locked every door. I called the police with shaking hands. 2 cruisers pulled up minutes later, lights flashing against the rain. I pointed to the house, my voice cracking as I told them someone was inside. They exchanged looks but didn't argue. 2 went in with guns drawn while the 3rd kept me by the car. I watched the windows, waiting to see movement. 10 minutes crawled by before the officers emerged. Their faces didn't make sense. Calm, almost pitying. "There's no one in there," one said. "No sign of forced entry. Everything looks normal." I wanted to scream, to argue, but my throat locked up. The other officer spoke quietly. "There are wet footprints in the kitchen. Bare feet. They go from the back door to the sink." Then he went out the back?" I asked desperately. He shook his head. "There are no prints leaving. Just coming in. I didn't stay in that house that night. I drove to a co-worker's apartment and crashed on her couch, still soaked, too wired to sleep. The next day, I rented a short-term room across town and avoided Pine Hollow altogether. 2 weeks later, I returned with 2 friends to collect my things. One of them helped me change the locks. Another set up cameras. I didn't tell them the full story, just said someone had broken in. That lie was easier than the truth. For a while it was quiet. Then one dry night a month later, I came home from another late shift. As I stepped onto the porch, the light above me blinked off. Not flickered, snapped off all at once. I froze with my keys in hand. My body knew before my mind did. I turned back, climbed into my car, and drove straight to a motel. I never went back to Pine Hollow. It was only later, talking to an older nurse at the hospital, that I heard the stories. She asked where I used to live. When I told her, her expression darkened. "They ever tell you about the drowned man?" she asked. I shook my head. She leaned closer. "Back in the 20s, when they flooded part of Pine Hollow to make that reservoir, a family refused to move. The water rose around their house. Neighbors swore the father would stand at the window, soaked to the skin, long after the valley filled. Folks say if you rent a place near that old floodplain, you might see him. He walks right out of the water, barefoot, dripping. But he never leaves." I didn't want to believe her. But I can't forget the smell of wet tile, the footprints with no exit, the way he stared out the window like he was still watching a world that had drowned around him. Now, whenever it rains hard enough to rattle the glass, I feel it again, that heaviness in the air, that hush like something listening. I don't look at the sink window when I visit friends. I don't leave porch lights burning, because I know one thing for certain. He wasn't a burglar. He wasn't a man at all. He was waiting. And one day, when the water comes again, I think he'll be waiting for me. It wasn't glamorous work, stacking pallets, hauling lumber, loading orders. But it paid more than the day's shift and kept me free from the endless chatter of managers. Nights had a rhythm I liked. Forklifts beeping in the distance, radios crackling, the metallic scent of sawdust and oil in the air. I could disappear into the grind without anyone looking too close. That night had been long, even by warehouse standards. The rain had already been falling since mid-afternoon, and by the time I clocked out near 11, the lot was a shallow lake. The floodlights reflected off the asphalt in jagged sheets of silver. My back ached, my hands stung with little cuts from boxes, and I was more than ready to collapse into my bed. My car, an ancient Ford Taurus I kept running with duct tape and prayers, was parked along the back fence. When I climbed in, the first thing I noticed was the mirror. The rear view had been tilted downward, not much, but just enough to catch the floor of the back seat instead of the road. I never touched that mirror. I kept it fixed where I liked it, angled perfectly for the narrow mountain roads. My stomach tightened, but I told myself I must have brushed it grabbing my bag. I adjusted it back, shoved the key in the ignition, and pulled out of the lot. The road home wound through Coal Ridge Hollow, a two-lane stretch that cut between steep embankments on either side. Most of the houses out there had been abandoned when the mine closed, left to sag and rot until the forest reclaimed them. I'd driven that road 100 times before, but in the rain it felt different. Trees bent low over the pavement, their branches dripping, and the headlights carved out only the nearest 10 feet before vanishing into blackness. I drove slower than usual, no music, no phone, just the squeal of the wipers and the rattle of water against the roof. That was when I saw her. She was standing on the shoulder, just where the ditch met the road. At first I thought she was a lost hiker, or maybe someone from one of the trailers tucked back in the woods. She was barefoot, her pale dress plastered to her skin by the rain. Her hair, long and dark, hung in ropes across her face. She wasn't moving. She wasn't signaling for help. She was just standing there. I slowed without meaning to, my chest tight. The headlights swept over her, but she didn't flinch. I rolled the window down a crack and shouted, "You all right?" No answer. Her head tilted slightly, like a puppet string had been pulled, but she didn't look at me. The rain came harder, hammering the car roof so loudly it almost drowned my voice. My instincts screamed to keep going, but guilt dug in. What if she really needed help? I eased the car onto the shoulder, grabbed my phone, and stepped out into the storm. The cold rain soaked me in seconds, plastering my shirt to my chest. My phone flashlight barely cut through the downpour, but I could see her clearly now. She was ankle-deep in mud, arms hanging stiff at her sides, hair clinging to her cheeks. Her skin looked wrong, pale, but not the kind of pale you see in the living. It had a stretched, swollen look, bluish in the beam of my light. I whispered, "Ma'am." That was when she turned. Her head twisted too far, like her neck didn't know how to move properly. Her lips parted, but no words came. Just a ragged, rattling exhale, the sound of something that hadn't drawn breath in a long time. I stepped back. She moved forward. The steps were jerky, heavy, splashing mud that didn't sound quite right, as if her body weighed more than it should. Her eyes, or what should have been eyes, were too dark, reflecting no light, staring holes through me. Panic took over. I ran. I slammed myself into the driver's seat, fumbling with the keys, fingers slipping from the water. The moment the engine caught, there was a thump against the side of the car. My head jerked up, and her face was at the window, pressed close, mouth gaping wide, rain pouring over her features. Her hands smeared against the glass, nails screeching faintly as they dragged down. I tore the car onto the road, tires spinning before they caught. My chest heaved as I floored the gas, the car fishtailing on the slick pavement. In the rearview, I caught a glimpse. She was back in the middle of the road, standing motionless again, head bowed as though nothing had happened. I didn't stop until I reached the 24-hour truck stop near the highway. I parked under the fluorescent lights, locked every door, and sat there shaking. My heart thudded, so hard I thought I might pass out. I stayed until dawn, too afraid to drive the rest of the way home in the dark. The next day, I told myself it had to have been exhaustion, maybe a trick of the light. Maybe I'd lost it for a few minutes out there, but the memory of her breath on the glass, of her nails scraping the metal, wouldn't leave. A week later, I mentioned it to one of the older guys at the warehouse, an Appalachian lifer named Hoyt. I expected him to laugh, but instead his expression went flat. "You were on Coal Ridge Hollow, weren't you?" he asked. I nodded slowly. He spat into his cup. "That's the Hollow Bride." I frowned. He told me the story in a low voice, like he didn't want anyone else to hear. Back in the 1940s, there'd been a flash flood in the valley. A young woman was meant to marry a miner from town, but the storm came down faster than anyone expected. The creek swelled into a torrent, sweeping away half the road. They say she tried to walk to him anyway, carrying her dress in her arms. The water took her before she made it across. Her body was never recovered. Locals claimed she'd been seen ever since. Always on rainy nights. Always barefoot, dress clinging, hair hanging heavy. If you stopped, she followed. If you fled, she appeared again further down the road, waiting. Some said she was searching for her groom. Others said she was just making sure no one ever left Coal Ridge Hollow alive. Hoyt told me all this matter of fact, like he was reciting directions. When he finished, he just said, "Don't drive that road when it rains. Not unless you want her in your car." I laughed it off in the moment, because what else could I do? But inside, my stomach was stone. It's been years since then, and I've never taken Coal Ridge Hollow again. Doesn't matter if it adds 20 minutes to the drive. Doesn't matter if gas costs more. I don't go near it. But here's the thing. On storm nights, when rain smears across my windshield and the wipers can't keep up, I feel it again, that weight in the air, the silence between the drops. And sometimes, in the corner of my rear view, I swear I see her reflection. Not on the road. Closer. In the back seat. My name is Caleb. I was working nights as a community college history lecturer in Wise County, Virginia. I know, that doesn't sound like the kind of job where danger follows you home. Most nights, the worst I dealt with was grading papers covered in half-baked Civil War essays, or listening to a student insist they deserved an A for showing up twice a week. I wasn't exactly hardened for horror, but what happened that October changed the way I moved through the world. It had been a long day, one of those parent-student evenings where we stayed late meeting families and answering questions about transfer credits and scholarship requirements. By the time I signed out and stepped into the parking lot, the rain had picked up, heavy enough that the drainage grates were overflowing. The campus lights shone on slick asphalt, turning the whole lot into a mirror. My satchel, full of ungraded essays, dragged at my shoulder, and my stomach was rumbling. I just wanted to get home. I had two options: take the main road, add 15 minutes, and hope a gas station was still open, or cut through a winding lane that passed through an abandoned strip mining town in Carter Hollow. The shortcut was faster, and I thought I remembered a small country store along the way that might still be open. My gas light had been glowing all day, so I decided to risk it. The store was barely more than a shack with one pump, sitting in a dip where the mountains curved. The canopy light buzzed faintly, the letters on the sign so faded I couldn't even make out the name. I pulled in, engine idling, and sat for a second with my hands on the wheel. The place looked like it had been forgotten decades ago. The windows were dark, the shelves inside shadowy shapes behind dirty glass. I was about to pull away when my gauge dipped just above empty. My car wasn't going to make it back to town without gas. So I got out. The rain hit me like a wall, plastering my jacket against me. I slid my card into the reader, which gave a reluctant beep before approving. I fumbled with the nozzle, glancing around constantly. The night had gone strangely still, except for the rain. Even the crickets were silent. That's when I saw him. At the far corner of the building, just where the wall met shadow, stood a tall figure. He was leaning slightly, not like he was hiding, more like he was waiting. His clothes looked too dark, soaking into the night around him. He didn't move, didn't shift, just stood facing me. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to. My skin prickled like every instinct in me was telling me to keep distance. I finished fueling as quickly as I could, shoved the nozzle back, and climbed into my car. My hands trembled on the wheel as I pulled out. As the canopy light shrank in my mirror, I risked one glance back. He was still there, in the same spot, head turned slightly as though watching me leave. I told myself it was just some drifter, maybe someone taking shelter from the rain. But 10 minutes down the road, as the highway bent between ridges, I caught movement in my rearview mirror. For a fraction of a second, I thought I saw a shadow in my back seat. I snapped my head around so fast my neck popped. Nothing. Just empty seats, wet papers sliding around. I pulled over, heart pounding, and switched on the dome light. I checked the back seat, the floor, even the trunk. Empty. But when I slid back behind the wheel, the mirror was tilted. Downward. Angled like someone shorter had been sitting back there. I adjusted it, trying to laugh at myself, but the sound that came out was tight and hollow. I drove the rest of the way to my apartment complex with my knuckles white on the wheel. By the time I parked under my building's flickering light, I was soaked in sweat despite the chill. I grabbed my satchel, ran up the stairs, and fumbled the keys into the lock. The moment I stepped inside, the smell hit me. Wet earth, heavy and sour, like river mud. I looked down. Footprints. Not mine. Dark and damp, smeared across the hardwood, leading from the front door straight down the hallway toward my bedroom. My keys slipped from my hand and clattered to the floor. For a long second, I just stood there, unable to breathe. My shoes were still dry. I hadn't even had time to track anything in yet. These prints were already here. Every instinct screamed to run. Instead, I grabbed the nearest object, a cast iron lamp from the end table, and followed the trail. The footprints were uneven, as if the person was dragging one foot. My bedroom door was cracked just enough to show slivers of darkness. I shoved it open, lamp raised. The room was empty. Windows locked. Closet bare. Under the bed, nothing. The prints stopped in the middle of the room and went no further. I spent the rest of the night in my car, engine idling, rain hammering the roof. At dawn, I called the police. 2 officers searched the apartment. They found nothing. No forced entry. No broken locks. One of them noticed the footprints, but didn't comment. When I pressed, the other muttered, "Could have been yours." Mud sticks. But I knew better. The next 2 nights were quiet. I tried to believe exhaustion had gotten the best of me. But then on the 3rd night, something worse happened. I was lying in bed around 2 a.m., every light in the apartment blazing, when I heard water running. The shower. My body locked. I live alone. I grabbed my phone, crept down the hall, and saw steam curling from under the bathroom door. My hand trembled on the knob. I counted to 3, yanked it open. Empty. The shower roared, spraying against tile. The mirror was fogged. No one inside. I turned the water off with shaking hands and stumbled backward. I didn't sleep at all. 2 days later, after another late class, I came home to find words written across the bathroom mirror in the condensation. Still here. There was no condensation. The glass was bone dry. But the letters were clear, traced in something that left a faint smear, like grease or oil. I packed a bag that night and stayed with a colleague. Within a week, I broke my lease and moved to a different county. Months later, I was at a diner off Route 23 when an older man overheard me mention Carter Hollow. He leaned across the counter and asked if I'd ever heard of the Lantern Keeper. I shook my head. They say he was a watchman at the old mine back in the 30s. Caught in a collapse during a rainstorm. The others pulled out, but he stayed behind with a lantern, swore he'd watch until help came. Floodwaters rose, buried him where he stood. Folks say he still waits, soaked to the bone, leaving muddy prints and watching houses where the rain pools. Some say if you see him at the hollow, he follows you home. The man said it like he was telling me the weather. He sipped his coffee and walked out. Now every time rain slams against my windows, I feel it, that smell of wet earth, that silence between drops. And sometimes, just before I fall asleep, I hear it again. The hiss of my shower turning on. I'm 33 now. I'd only been working as a volunteer fireman and EMT in Buchanan County for a little over a year. It wasn't a glamorous job, long nights, muddy boots, and plenty of calls that turned out to be people drunk, lonely, or scared of shadows. But back then, I still believed I could handle anything as long as I had my gear, my training, and a little common sense. What I saw one October night during a downpour in the heart of Garden Creek proved me wrong. The rain had started around dusk. It wasn't a gentle drizzle, but a relentless pounding that blurred the world into streaks of silver. By 10 p.m., the road leading back from our station was a sheet of water. Dispatch buzzed my radio, calling in a welfare check. Someone lying in the road outside a farmhouse along Red Ash Hollow. The caller was an older man who said he saw a figure stretched out in the mud and didn't want to go near it himself. I pulled the truck onto the winding road, wipers thudding, headlights cutting through walls of water. Red Ash Hollow is the kind of place where time seems stuck 50 years back. Farmhouses sagging under ivy, barns half collapsed, driveways overrun with weeds. The kind of place where you expect to see curtains move when no one's supposed to be home. The caller's house was a squat white place with peeling shutters, a porch light flickering faintly through the rain. He stood on the porch in a yellow coat, shoulders hunched, pointing toward the far end of his drive. I followed his gesture and froze. There was someone lying at the edge of the gravel, half in the ditch. I parked, grabbed my kit, and ran through the rain. The figure was face down, arms awkward at the sides. The clothing was odd, an old-fashioned shirt and trousers, soaked and clinging, boots caked with mud. I knelt beside him and called out, "Sir, can you hear me?" He didn't answer. I touched his wrist to check a pulse. My skin jerked at the contact. He was cold, unnaturally cold, as though he'd been pulled from a creek bed in midwinter. But his pulse, it was there, steady but faint. As I leaned closer, water dripped steadily from his hair, even though there was no runoff around his head. It was as if he'd just been pulled from the river moments ago. I tried to roll him gently onto his side. That was when his body stiffened, every muscle locking as though a cord had been pulled tight. And then he sat up, not slowly, not with the groan of someone regaining consciousness. One moment he was sprawled. The next, his torso jerked upright, spine ramrod straight. I stumbled back, my boots skidding in the mud. He faced downward, his chin nearly against his chest, water still dripping from him in slow, rhythmic beats, though the rain itself seemed quieter in that moment. "Sir?" My voice cracked. He didn't move, didn't blink. His hands began to twitch, fingers curling and uncurling in a pattern too quick to be shivers. That's when the air changed. It's hard to explain to someone who wasn't there. Imagine being in a room when someone steps close behind you, so close you can feel heat and pressure without them touching you. Now stretch that feeling outward until it blankets the whole night. That's how it felt standing there, pressed in by something unseen, something watching. And then, with no warning, the man rose. Not in the way people rise from kneeling. No shifting of knees, no struggle for balance. He lifted all at once, pulled straight up, as though a string yanked through the crown of his head. He began to walk, not toward me, but toward the field behind the house. I called after him, voice shaking, but he didn't acknowledge. He moved through the muck without faltering, boots cutting no splashes, stride steady and unervingly smooth. The field was a soup of rainwater, sucking at my own boots when I tried to follow. But he glided across it, unbothered. 50 feet out, he stopped. Slowly, impossibly slowly, his head lifted until his face tilted toward me. I swear to God, it wasn't a human face. The features were there, but wrong. The jaw too long, stretched as if pulled by invisible fingers. The eyes wide, dark pits that reflected no light. And yet I knew something was staring through them, as though they were only windows for something else. And then he moved, not running, floating. His feet jerked forward too fast, his body swaying like a marionette trying to imitate a sprint. He vanished into the black line of trees beyond the field. When I finally turned back, the homeowner was gone from the porch. By the time deputies arrived 20 minutes later, I was drenched to the bone, shaking so hard I could barely explain what I'd seen. We searched the field. No footprints. No broken stalks of grass. The rain should have left something, but there was nothing at all. One officer muttered that I was probably exhausted. Another patted my shoulder and suggested maybe I'd stumbled onto a drunk who ran into the woods. I wanted to believe them, but I couldn't, because when I checked the dash cam later, it showed everything up until the moment he stood. Then static, white snow filling the screen for 10 full seconds. When the picture returned, I was alone, staring into the dark trees, my voice captured faintly on the mic whispering, "Where did you go?" The official report listed it as subject fled scene, presumed distressed. I kept my mouth shut. What else was I supposed to say? That I'd watched something inhuman rise from a ditch and walk into the woods? A week later, I told one of the older firefighters what I saw. He didn't laugh. He didn't even look surprised. He just asked one question. Was it in Red Ash Hollow? When I nodded, he leaned back slowly. Then you saw one of the still men. I asked him what that meant, and he told me a story I wish I hadn't heard. Back before the mines shut down, there'd been a collapse during a storm. Miners trapped inside had drowned when the rainwater rushed through the tunnels. Locals said their bodies were never recovered. Since then, people whispered that figures appeared on storm nights, men who looked half-drowned, standing stiff in fields and ditches. They never spoke. They just rose, walked, and vanished. Folks called them still men because of how they moved, frozen one moment, upright the next. He said if you tried to follow, they'd lead you into the woods. And if you followed far enough, you'd never come back. I didn't tell anyone else after that, but I'll say this. Every time I drive a back road in the rain, I keep my window rolled down and the radio off. I listen, because the night I saw him, it wasn't the sight that terrified me most. It was the sound, the slow, steady dripping of water, falling where it shouldn't. And sometimes when I wake late at night to rain hammering my roof, I swear I hear it again, steady drops hitting the floor of my bedroom, even though the ceiling has never leaked.